The moment I realized my son didn't die by fate, but by a decision made behind my back, I was standing at his grave, surrounded by silence, when strangers thanked us for saving their child's life. What happened next was not justice handed to me. It was something far colder, far more deliberate, and it began the second I understood who truly ended my son's life. Before I tell you the complete story, do me a small favor, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from, so this story reaches the people who need to hear it. The cemetery outside Glenridge was still damp from the early morning rain. The grass clung to my shoes as if it didn't want me to leave. It had been exactly 1 year since we buried our son, Noah Hale, and even the sky looked tired of mourning. My husband, Adrian, stood beside me with his hands clasped in front of him, his face carved into the same expressionless mask he'd worn every visit since the funeral. People used to say grief hit everyone differently. I believed them until I realized some grief was rehearsed. I was adjusting the flowers at Noah's headstone when I noticed a couple approaching from the path. They looked hesitant, like people stepping into sacred ground without permission. The woman clutched a folded piece of paper in one hand, her eyes already glassy. The man walked half a step behind her, his jaw tight, his shoulders rigid. "Excuse me," the woman said softly. I turned, expecting condolences. Instead, she inhaled sharply and said words that made the air leave my lungs. "Thank you for donating your son's organs," she said. "Because of him, our daughter is alive." Time didn't slow. It shattered. I stared at her, convinced I'd misheard. "I'm sorry," I said. "What did you say?" Her eyes flicked to the grave, then back to me. "Your son's lungs. They saved our little girl. We've wanted to thank you for months, but we didn't know how." My heartbeat thundered in my ears. "We didn't donate anything," I said. "There was no donation." The man frowned. "You're Noah Hale's parents, right?" "Yes," I said, my voice unsteady. "But Noah was declared beyond recovery while in a coma. There was never—" "That's not what our paperwork says," the woman interrupted, her voice trembling now. She pulled out her phone and unlocked it. "Look, this is the authorization." Adrian's hand clamped around my arm, so suddenly it startled me. "We should go," he said quickly. "This is a misunderstanding." I shook him off and leaned closer to the phone. There it was. Authorization approved. Organ recovery cleared. Signed, Adrian Hale. Medical coordinator, Dr. Elaine Rourke. The name hit me like a punch. Dr. Rourke. She was the hospital advocate. The woman who had hovered during Noah's final days, always appearing when Adrian was alone, always vanishing when I returned. The one who kept insisting there was nothing more to be done. My vision blurred. "This is fake," I whispered. The woman began typing rapidly, searching. Her breathing quickened. "Wait. Glenridge Medical Center. Dr. Elaine Rourke." Her face drained of color. "Oh my God." She turned the screen toward me again. News articles, court records, sentencing details. Convicted of illegal organ procurement. 11-year sentence. Paid families up to $75,000 for expedited consent. 14 confirmed cases. The cemetery fell silent in a way I had never experienced. Not peaceful, but suffocating. I turned slowly toward my husband. He couldn't look at me. $75,000, I whispered. "That's how much, isn't it?" His throat bobbed. He said nothing. The other couple stood frozen. The man stepped back as if the ground beneath him had cracked. "We didn't know," he said hoarsely. "We swear we would never have agreed." I barely registered his words. "You told me Noah was crashing while I was getting coffee," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "You said it happened suddenly. You said there was nothing anyone could do." Adrian's hands trembled. "You disconnected the machines while I was gone," I said. "Didn't you?" Silence. I saw our daughter, Lily, in my mind, 4 years old, sleeping in her brother's bed for months because it still smelled like him, writing letters to Santa, asking for him to come home. You watched that, I thought, knowing what you did. You took money, I said louder now. You ended our son's life for it. The woman collapsed onto a nearby bench, sobbing. The man wrapped an arm around her, his face ashen. They backed away, muttering apologies, horror written into every line of their bodies. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out Adrian's car keys. I'm driving home, I said. You're not. His head snapped up. Please, he whispered. Don't do this here. I took out my phone and started dialing. Don't call the police, he begged, panic breaking through his composure. I'm not, I said calmly. I'm calling someone who will make sure you tell the truth. My father answered on the first ring. Dad, I said, my voice steady despite everything shaking inside me. I'm at Noah's grave. I'm driving home alone. Adrian needs a ride. I'll explain when you get here. Adrian's face crumpled. 20 minutes later, my father's truck rolled through the gates. Adrian walked toward it like a man being escorted to his own undoing. I didn't look back. I watched my father's truck disappear down the cemetery road before I finally allowed my knees to give out. The gravel bit into my palms as I steadied myself against the edge of Noah's grave. The stone was cold, the carved letters too permanent, too final. 1 year ago, I believed grief was the worst thing that could happen to a mother. I was wrong. Grief was survivable. Betrayal was not. I don't remember the drive home. I only remember pulling into a gas station 2 miles away, my vision tunneling, my chest tightening until I thought I might collapse right there between the pumps. My hand shook so badly I dropped my phone twice before managing to unlock it. When I finally pressed record, my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. I spoke everything out loud, the couple, the authorization email, the exact amount, the way Adrian couldn't look at me, the way his silence screamed louder than any confession. I kept talking even when my throat burned, even when my words dissolved into sobs. 10 minutes became 20. I forced myself to keep going because I knew memory would try to soften this later, to blur the edges, to protect me. I couldn't let it. When I finally drove home, the house looked exactly the same as it always had. That normalcy made my stomach turn. My mother's car was already in the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see Lily sitting at the table, working on a puzzle, her small brow furrowed in concentration. The sight of her nearly broke me. I came in through the back door. Lily looked up and ran toward me, arms flung wide. I dropped to my knees and held her so tightly she squeaked. I told her I loved her over and over, burying my face in her hair. My mother watched us with growing concern, reading something in my expression that scared her. I caught her eye and shook my head slightly, then mouthed, "Take her tonight." She didn't ask questions. She just nodded. Lily proudly showed me a puzzle piece shaped like a butterfly. I told her it was beautiful and that she was so smart. My mother quietly packed an overnight bag while Lily chattered about school. 15 minutes later, they were gone, and the house fell silent in a way that felt unnatural, like the air itself was holding its breath. That night, I opened my laptop and searched for Noah's funeral video. My cousin had posted it online for family who couldn't attend. I had avoided it for a year. I told myself I wasn't ready. The truth was, I didn't want to see Adrian speak. There he was, standing at the podium in a black suit, his voice steady, his posture strong. He spoke about love, about duty, about how we both stayed by Noah's side until the very end. I made it through the first minute before running to the bathroom to vomit. I came back and watched it again. Then again. Each time I noticed more. The way Adrian adjusted his tie when he talked about the hospital. The way his voice cracked, not with sorrow, but with something closer to fear, when he said Noah's passing was not in vain. The comments beneath the video praised him endlessly. What a devoted father. Your son was lucky to have you. I took screenshots of every single one. Then I logged into our bank account. I don't know what I expected. A single deposit, maybe something easy to dismiss if I was still in denial. Instead, I saw 3 separate cash deposits of $25,000 each, spaced over 2 weeks after Noah's death, all marked as gifts. My hands went numb. I scrolled further. Smaller deposits followed. 5,000, 3,000, always under reporting thresholds, always vague descriptions. And then I remembered the boat. The $60,000 boat Adrian bought 3 months after Noah died. He said a wealthy cousin had helped him as an anniversary gift. I searched the dealership's archived listing online. The purchase date was 32 days after Noah's death. Paid in cash. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I started documenting. Screenshots. Downloads. Emails sent to myself. Cloud backups. Physical copies printed and placed in a folder I hid behind old paint cans in the garage. I sent a long message to my sister, explaining everything that happened at the cemetery. She replied immediately, "I'm on my way. Don't do anything until I get there." She arrived 40 minutes later with her laptop, tissues, and a look I'd never seen on her face before. Rage. Focused. Controlled. We sat at the kitchen table while I cried and she organized. She said she'd always felt something was wrong about the boat, about the sudden money, about how Adrian always insisted on meeting hospital staff alone. The next morning, I called Glenridge Medical Center's records department and requested Noah's full medical file. They said it would take 2 weeks. When I mentioned possible legal action, I was put on hold. A supervisor came on and offered expedited processing for an additional fee. I paid it without hesitation. Then I called our therapist's office and asked for an emergency appointment, just me. My voice cracked as I said there had been a major development regarding my son's death. They scheduled me for the next morning at 7. That afternoon, I went to my mother's house to see Lily. I kept my voice light while she showed me a new drawing for her brother, a rainbow with birds flying through it. She asked if Noah could see rainbows in heaven. I told her yes, absolutely. My mother watched me from the doorway, her eyes filled with questions. I excused myself to the bathroom and sobbed into a towel so Lily wouldn't hear. Late that night, after Lily fell asleep, I spread a poster board across my dining table. I wrote Noah's hospital admission date on the left and drew a long line across the board. Blue markers for days Adrian and I were both there. Red for days he was alone. Green for every call from the hospital about end-of-life decisions. The red clustered thickly around the final week. My hands cramped as the pattern emerged. Adrian had been alone with Noah for 3 hours the day before he died. 3 hours while I was home paying bills and grabbing clean clothes. 3 hours that ended everything. The doorbell rang just after 7 the next morning. My father stood there, jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. He hugged me like he was building armor around my body. I showed him the timeline. I watched his face drain of color. He photographed everything and said he was saving copies in his safe. Later that morning, I searched Dr. Elaine Rourke's name online. An article from 2 years earlier made my breath catch. 14 families, the same pattern. Patients showing improvement, a parent absent, consent obtained. There was a link to a private support group for affected families. I hovered over it for 10 minutes before clicking. My phone rang almost immediately. The hospital's risk management department. The woman on the line used a gentle, practiced tone as she assured me they took my concerns seriously. I could hear the lawyers in every syllable. An hour later, my father texted me. Adrian showed up here. He confessed. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Another followed. Dad made him sit on the porch. He admitted signing the papers while you were gone. The next morning, I sat in my therapist's office, my hands shaking in my lap. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she slid a business card across the table. A victim's rights attorney. She told me this wasn't my fault, that what I was experiencing was trauma, not weakness. I cried harder at that than I had in months. After the session, I went straight to the bank and requested printed statements from the year Noah died. The teller mentioned large cash deposits being flagged automatically. She placed the papers into a thick envelope that felt impossibly heavy. That night, an email arrived from a woman named Margaret. Her son had been one of Dr. Rourke's victims 3 years earlier. She invited me to a support meeting and warned me that the process would be long, exhausting, and brutal. She was right. The next day, Lily's school called. Her teacher said Lily had been drawing hospitals during art class and telling other children that her dad had done something bad. I scheduled a meeting with the school counselor immediately. 3 days later, the hospital records arrived. Page 47 showed the time life support was withdrawn. 2:53 p.m. My cafe receipt was stamped 2:48. Adrian told everyone Noah was declared beyond recovery at 3:55. The lie sat there in ink, undeniable. I photographed every page and sent copies to my sister and the attorney. The truth was no longer something he could talk his way around. It was documented, timed, permanent, and I wasn't finished yet. The more evidence I gathered, the clearer it became that what happened to Noah wasn't a single terrible choice made in panic. It was a sequence of deliberate decisions, carefully hidden behind paperwork and practiced sympathy. And once I saw that pattern, I couldn't unsee it. The morning after the medical records arrived, I logged into our old phone account. Adrian had always handled the bills, and I had never questioned it. Now I pulled up the itemized statements from the week Noah died, my fingers trembling as the list loaded. There they were. 3 calls from Adrian's phone to a number I didn't recognize, all on the day before Noah's life support was removed. 1 at 9 in the morning, lasting 23 minutes. 1 just after noon for 19 minutes. Another at 4:30, lasting nearly half an hour. I copied the number into a search bar. Elaine Rourke Patient Advocacy Office. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen until my eyes burned. Those calls weren't accidental. They weren't brief check-ins. They were conversations. Long ones. Planned ones. I screenshotted everything and uploaded the files to 3 separate cloud accounts. Then I printed them and added them to the folder in the garage. I was building something now, layer by layer, brick by brick, and I could feel it taking shape. I searched online for news articles from the week Noah was hospitalized. Most of them covered the car accident that put him in a coma. But buried deep in the search results, on page 4, I found a local paper article dated 2 days before Noah died. The headline was about hospital upgrades. Halfway down the page, a quote stopped my breath. A neurologist from Glenridge Medical Center stated that several comatose patients were showing encouraging neurological improvement and could regain consciousness within weeks. The article didn't name patients. It didn't have to. I printed 20 copies and highlighted that quote on every single one. That afternoon, my father showed up unannounced. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just held up his phone and said, "I recorded him." Adrian's voice filled the room, shaky and desperate. He admitted receiving the money, admitted signing the consent, admitted he thought Noah had no real chance anyway. I listened without expression. When the recording ended, I said, quietly, save it everywhere. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was the woman from the cemetery, the recipient child's mother. She said she couldn't sleep, that she couldn't stop thinking about what happened, that her daughter was alive because of Noah, but she didn't know how to live with the truth of it. I stared at the message for a long time before replying that I needed time. 3 days later, I sat in the office of a victim's rights attorney recommended by the support group. She reviewed my evidence in silence, flipping through pages, making notes in the margins. When she finally looked up, her expression was careful. She explained that criminal charges against Adrian were unlikely. Proving intent beyond reasonable doubt would be difficult. Civil action, however, was another matter. Document everything, she said. Every interaction. Every record. every inconsistency. I left her office with a thick folder and a sense of grim clarity. This wasn't going to be quick. It wasn't going to be clean, but it was going to be thorough. That evening, another envelope arrived. This one from the district attorney's office. Inside was a copy of Elaine Rourke's plea agreement transcript. Page after page detailed how she targeted financially vulnerable families, how she waited for one parent to be absent, how she minimized signs of recovery, how she framed consent as something noble. Reading her words felt like reopening a wound I'd barely managed to close. The bank manager called the next day. He had traced Adrian's deposits. The cash was converted into cashier's checks and wired directly to a luxury boat dealership. The trail was clean. Too clean. I drove to the house Adrian was temporarily staying in and handed him a financial restraining order. My father sat in his truck outside with the engine running. Adrian signed without reading a word, sweat soaking through his collar. That night, I attended my first support group meeting. 7 parents sat in a circle in a church basement. When I shared Noah's story, another mother began crying before I finished. She said Elaine Rourke had used the exact same phrases on her family. Same promises. Same urgency. We weren't unlucky. We were selected. Later, I remembered the old tablet Adrian and I used to share. I turned it on and checked his messages. In a text to his brother dated 2 months after Noah's death, Adrian sent a photo of the boat, bragging about what a smart purchase it was. His brother asked how he could afford it. Adrian replied that he'd gotten a bonus at work. I added the screenshot to the folder. The next morning, I sat in my car outside the Child Protective Services office and made a call I never imagined I'd make. I explained everything. The social worker listened carefully and advised me to file for emergency custody with supervised visitation. She emailed me the forms before we hung up. I filled them out right there, using the steering wheel as a desk. My sister texted me later that day. She'd been digging through Adrian's old computer calendar backups and found something strange. Multiple meetings labeled RW, private, scheduled for times when I was at work or running errands. The dates matched the weeks before Noah died. The hospital's legal team called that afternoon. They offered money. First $25,000, then $50,000, all in the name of healing. I declined. That night, I received a voicemail from the neurologist quoted in the article. He sounded shaken. He said Noah had been improving, that he recommended waiting, that he told Adrian this directly. I saved the message, transcribed it, backed it up. The evidence was no longer just heavy. It was overwhelming. And for the first time since the cemetery, I felt something shift. Not relief, not peace, but certainty. Adrian hadn't just made a terrible choice. He had constructed a lie and lived inside it for a year. And I was about to tear it down. By the time I realized how deep everything went, my life had turned into folders, timelines, and recorded conversations. Every day began with checking backups and ended with writing notes I never wanted to forget. I stopped trusting memory. Memory softened things. Evidence did not. 2 days after the neurologist's voicemail, my attorney sent out preservation letters. Formal notices demanding that Glenridge Medical Center and Adrian maintain all records, emails, recordings, and internal communications related to Noah's care. Certified mail, email confirmations, paper trails that could not be erased quietly. She explained that if anything disappeared now, it would only make things worse for them. The legal machine was slow, but it had started moving. That same afternoon, Adrian's employer called me. He had listed me as his emergency contact. The man on the line sounded uncomfortable as he asked if the allegations were true. I told him everything in careful, factual sentences. An hour later, Adrian was suspended pending an ethics investigation. 17 messages came through from Adrian that night. Missed calls, voicemails, texts begging me to talk. I didn't respond. My attorney warned me that anything I said could be twisted later. Silence was no longer weakness. It was protection. We met a week later at a diner just off the highway, chosen because it had cameras and witnesses. Both our lawyers sat between us like referees. Adrian looked smaller than I remembered, dark circles under his eyes, clothes wrinkled, hands constantly twisting together. His lawyer spoke first, framing everything as panic and fear. Adrian finally spoke himself, his voice breaking as he admitted he was terrified of losing the house, of drowning in medical debt, of failing our daughter. He said Dr. Rourke convinced him that Noah's life would mean something if other children could be saved. He said he believed Noah was already gone. I watched him calmly, noting every contradiction. When he mentioned believing there was no chance, my attorney slid the neurologist's statement across the table. Adrian stopped talking. That night, I found Lily's old letter to Santa tucked into the keepsake box in my closet. Her handwriting was shaky, the paper warped from tears. I sat on the floor reading it again and again until something finally shifted inside me. I hadn't failed my son by stepping away for coffee. I hadn't abandoned him. Someone else had. The following week, 2 large bankers' boxes arrived by courier. Noah's complete medical file. My attorney and I spent 6 hours reviewing every page. On page 847, we found it, consent marked as obtained with both parents present. The timestamp showed I was at a cafe register, my purchase logged to the minute. Forgery. My attorney actually laughed, sharp and incredulous. This alone changes everything, she said. We copied the file obsessively. Physical copies, digital copies, locations spread across different places. Nothing could vanish now. My father helped me set up a recording app on my phone that automatically uploaded to the cloud. He installed a small dash camera in my car. We practiced scenarios, Adrian approaching me in public, showing up at the house, cornering me at a custody exchange. Every interaction would be documented. 3 weeks later, the hospital's legal team called again. This time the offer was $200,000. No confidentiality clause. I stared at the papers spread across my attorney's desk. The money would secure Lily's therapy, her schooling, her future. Accepting it felt wrong. Refusing it felt reckless. I asked for 48 hours. That same afternoon, a reporter contacted me. She was working on a series about medical advocacy abuse and said 12 families had already shared their stories. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. She showed me drafts, names changed, details protected, patterns unmistakable. I told her everything. 2 days later, the article ran on the front page. The headline didn't mention us directly, but people who knew recognized the story immediately. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Messages from old friends, from people I barely remembered, from families asking questions they were afraid to ask before. That night, the recipient mother emailed me a long apology. She attached studies showing Noah's type of brain activity often led to recovery. Her daughter was doing well, but struggled with guilt. They wanted to testify if needed. I printed the email and added it to the folder. The next morning, I filed for legal separation. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. The clerk handed me stacks of forms while explaining custody evaluations and timelines. I requested supervised visitation and sole authority over medical and educational decisions. The filing fee drained my checking account. My father covered it without hesitation. Adrian was served 2 days later. He called the house repeatedly. I saved the voicemail transcripts and didn't answer a single one. Through a formal information request, I obtained the hospital's internal audit from the year Noah died. 50 pages, 6 complaints against Dr. Rourke before her arrest. Ethics board meetings where concerns were raised and ignored. One statistic stood out. She had facilitated more organ recoveries than any coordinator in the state. Impossible numbers. My attorney sent copies to the reporter. That weekend, while Lily stayed with my mother, I recorded a video message in Noah's old room. I spoke for an hour explaining everything, Why I fought, why I left Adrian, why truth mattered. I showed his baby photos, his drawings, the sweater his grandmother knitted for him before she passed. I saved the video on a flash drive and locked it away for Lily's future. Depositions followed. I sat across from hospital attorneys in a windowless room, presenting my timeline piece by piece. I described learning the truth at a cemetery. I described watching my husband praised for devotion he never showed. I described the exact moment everything collapsed. They asked about my emotional state. I answered honestly. The next day, Adrian was deposed. According to the court reporter, he contradicted himself more times than she could count. He admitted practicing his funeral speech. He admitted receiving the money. He admitted Dr. Rourke called him repeatedly the week Noah died. His lawyer struggled to control him. A month later, the district attorney declined criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence of intent. I wasn't surprised. My attorney assured me the civil case was strong. Reputation mattered as much as verdicts. We filed the lawsuit against Glenridge Medical Center and Adrian alongside 14 other families. The room where we met was filled with grief and quiet fury. Some stories were worse than ours. Twins lost. Parents destroyed by guilt. One father who never survived learning the truth. The hospital's insurer pushed hard for settlement. I started specialized trauma therapy. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. The nightmares changed. They softened. The court froze all marital assets. Adrian's boat was ordered sold immediately. When the marina repossessed it, they found Noah's old life vest on board. I didn't cry. I met the recipient mother weeks later. We sat together for hours, sharing photos. Her daughter was innocent. That mattered. The settlement offer climbed again. $500,000. Full coverage for Lily's therapy. Education support. Medical costs. I accepted with one condition. No silence. The hospital agreed. Adrian moved into a small apartment. All communication went through a monitored, co-parenting app. Custody exchanges happened at a police station parking lot. Lily adjusted slowly. Structure helped. Months passed. Grief didn't vanish, but it stopped owning me. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Noah died. Control. Life after the settlement didn't arrive with relief the way people imagine it does. There was no moment where everything suddenly felt lighter or where the past loosened its grip. What came instead was structure. Boundaries so rigid they felt unnatural at first, and routines built entirely around keeping my daughter safe and my sanity intact. All communication with Adrian ran through the co-parenting app. Every message time-stamped. Every word archived. The first message he sent was 3 long paragraphs of apology, regret, and promises to change. I read it once, then closed the app without responding. My replies were limited to pickup times, locations, and school details. Nothing more. Silence had become my shield. Our first custody exchange happened in the police station parking lot under bright lights and security cameras. Lily didn't understand why we couldn't meet at home anymore. She held my hand tightly. Her fingers curled around mine as if letting go might make something worse happen. Adrian looked hollow, weight lost, eyes sunken, but I felt nothing looking at him. No anger, no pity, just distance. He tried to hand me an envelope as I buckled Lily into her seat. I pointed to the designated exchange box we'd agreed upon. An officer standing nearby watched the interaction without comment. Adrian placed the envelope into the box with shaking hands. I drove away without opening it. 2 months later, I spoke at the support group without blaming myself for stepping away to get coffee. I told them about Noah squeezing my hand the day before he died, about believing we still had time. One father said quietly, "Absence is not betrayal." The words settled into me like something finally landing where it belonged. At home, my parents helped Lily build a memory box for her brother. Photos, small toys, stories written on index cards. Lily added drawings every week, Noah riding a bike, Noah playing with our old dog, Noah flying a kite. The pictures no longer showed hospital beds. That change alone felt monumental. The anniversary came and went quietly. We visited the cemetery with only immediate family. Lily placed her newest drawing by the headstone. I wrapped the dinosaur sweater Noah's grandmother had knitted and laid it beside the stone. I told him out loud that I knew the truth now, saying it felt like closing a door that had been stuck open too long. The nonprofit that supported families affected by medical misconduct called me the following week. They offered a part-time position helping parents navigate hospital systems after loss. The pay was half of what I used to earn, but I accepted immediately. For the first time in years, I felt useful without feeling consumed. My first day back at work, I locked myself in the bathroom for 10 minutes just to breathe. No one questioned it. Everyone there understood grief in its many forms. Money was tighter with the lower salary, but the settlement covered Lily's therapy and our basic needs. I canceled every subscription Adrian had signed up for and packed lunches instead of eating out. Simple choices felt empowering. Lily began play therapy with a specialist in childhood grief. At first, every drawing included hospitals. After 3 months, they disappeared. Her therapist taught her to keep a feelings journal where she wrote letters to her brother, sometimes sad, sometimes happy. She laughed more, real laughter, the kind that filled a room instead of echoing hollowly. 5 families from the lawsuit began meeting weekly to push for hospital oversight reforms. We reviewed policies, flagged failures, and drafted recommendations. When we presented them to the hospital board, they listened not out of compassion, but because they knew we could expose everything. New safeguards were implemented. 2 independent physicians required for end-of-life decisions. No financial incentives for organ procurement. Mandatory waiting periods when recovery indicators existed. They were changes born from loss, but they mattered. My sister introduced me to someone she knew from her gym, a widower named Thomas. We met for coffee. He didn't flinch when I told him about Noah or Adrian. He simply said, "Trust takes time." He never pushed, never rushed. After 2 months, I let him meet Lily at a playground. She liked that he pushed her on the swings without being asked. Life didn't return to what it was. It reshaped itself into something quieter, sturdier. Adrian's supervised visits continued at the community center. Lily adjusted to the routine. She asked fewer questions over time. The structure made her feel safe. 6 months after the cemetery, I woke up one morning and didn't immediately remember that Noah was gone. The guilt hit seconds later, sharp and cruel, but my therapist helped me understand that forgetting briefly wasn't betrayal. It was survival. I saw Noah and Lily sometimes, in the way she wrinkled her nose when concentrating, in the way she tilted her head when asking questions. Those moments hurt, but they also felt like gifts. The resurrection I once prayed for never came. But watching my son live on through his sisters' laughter mattered more than any miracle. And still, there was one final truth waiting to be faced. The truth I hadn't fully confronted, yet wasn't about Adrian, the hospital, or even the money. It was about what came after, how the consequences of one hidden decision kept rippling outward, touching lives long after the papers were signed and the headlines faded. 3 weeks after Lily began sleeping through the night again, my attorney called to tell me the civil case had officially merged with the other families' lawsuits. 14 of us now stood together against Glenridge Medical Center. The hospital's insurance carrier, suddenly aware of the scale of exposure, requested mediation. My attorney explained what that meant in practical terms. They were afraid of discovery. Discovery would open everything: internal emails, meeting notes, deleted drafts, recorded calls. The hospital knew what would surface. The mediation session was held in a glass-walled conference room downtown. Representatives from the hospital sat stiff-backed on one side, their lawyers whispering constantly. On our side, Parents held photos, letters, and folded tissues. Grief doesn't look dramatic in real life. It looks exhausted. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I laid out the timeline calmly, explaining exactly how I learned the truth at the cemetery, how the records contradicted what I was told, how consent was forged. I watched the hospital representatives avoid eye contact as I spoke. One of the mediators finally asked, "What would resolution look like for you?" I answered without hesitation. Transparency, accountability, and safeguards that stop this from ever happening again. Money mattered, but it wasn't the point anymore. 2 days later, the hospital agreed to an independent oversight committee and annual audits of all organ procurement cases. They also agreed to fund counseling programs for affected families statewide. It wasn't justice in the way movies portray it, but it was impact. Adrian's role in the case grew smaller as the focus shifted toward institutional failure. Still, his presence lingered like a shadow. He continued using the co-parenting app, his messages alternating between regret and attempts to justify himself. I responded only when necessary. The boundaries stayed firm. One afternoon, while Lily was at school, a thick envelope arrived from the district attorney's office. Inside was a notice that, although criminal charges were declined, Adrian's testimony was now officially part of a broader investigation into hospital misconduct. He wouldn't be charged, but he wouldn't be invisible either. I didn't feel satisfaction reading it, just confirmation. That night, Lily asked me a question I'd been dreading. We were sitting on her bed reading when she said quietly, "Mom, did Dad hurt Noah?" My breath caught. Therapy had prepared me for this, but preparation doesn't erase the weight. "He made a very bad decision," I said carefully. "A decision that should never have been made." "Did he mean to?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. But what matters is that it wasn't your fault. And it wasn't Noah's fault. And it wasn't mine." She thought about that for a long time before nodding. Then she asked if Noah could still hear her letters. "Yes," I said. "I believe he can." A week later, I attended another support group meeting, this time as someone others leaned on. New families had joined, parents just beginning to suspect something was wrong about how their children died. I recognized the confusion in their eyes, the disbelief. I gave them practical advice. Save everything. Ask questions. Don't let anyone rush you. Helping them didn't reopen my wounds the way I feared. It reinforced something solid inside me. At work, I took on more responsibility at the nonprofit. I began coordinating workshops for families navigating hospital systems, teaching them what questions to ask and what rights they had. Each time I spoke, I thought of Noah, not as a victim, but as a reason. Adrian attempted once more to speak to me directly. He approached me during a supervised exchange, his voice low, his eyes red. "I live with it every day," he said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know I'm sorry." I looked at him steadily and replied, "Living with it is not the same as fixing it." The supervisor documented the interaction. Adrian stepped back. Weeks passed. Lily's school counselor reported progress. Fewer anxiety episodes, better focus. She joined a soccer team. The first time I watched her run across the field laughing, something inside me loosened. The lawsuit finally concluded with a formal settlement announcement. The hospital released a public statement acknowledging systemic failures without admitting fault. It wasn't enough, but it was more than silence. On the 1-year mark since the truth came out, I returned to the cemetery alone. I sat beside Noah's grave and talked to him, not about what happened, but about what came after. About Lily. About the changes. About how his life, even cut short, had protected others. I didn't ask for signs. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I just told him I loved him. When I stood to leave, I felt something unexpected. Not closure, but steadiness. The kind that lets you keep going. I drove home knowing the story wasn't over yet, but I was no longer trapped inside it. And there were still 2 more truths to tell. The steadiness I felt that day didn't mean the past stopped knocking. It meant I finally knew how to answer it without letting it inside. A few weeks after my visit to the cemetery, the reporter who had covered the hospital's story reached out again. Her series had triggered audits at 2 other medical centers in neighboring counties. Families were coming forward, quietly at first, then in numbers too large to ignore. She asked if I would be willing to speak publicly, anonymously, about what to watch for when a loved one is hospitalized long-term. I thought about Lily, about Noah, about how many parents never even realize the questions they should ask. I agreed. The interview aired without names or faces, just my voice. I spoke about timing, about pressure, about how urgency can be manufactured. I said something that surprised even me when it came out. Grief makes people obedient. That's why safeguards matter. The response was overwhelming. Emails poured in from families who had paused life support discussions after hearing the segment. One mother wrote that her son woke up 3 weeks later. I read that message twice, then once more aloud, just to hear the words exist. At home, Lily noticed the shift in me. One night she crawled into my bed and said, "You don't look so heavy anymore." I smiled into the dark. I learned how to put some of it down. Her supervised visits with Adrian continued. They were calm on the surface, board games, art projects, monitored conversations, but Lily started asking fewer questions about him. She no longer counted the days until his visits. When the supervisor asked how she felt afterward, Lily said, "It's okay, but I like home better." I never spoke poorly about Adrian to her. I didn't need to. Children sense truth without explanation. Thomas remained a quiet presence in our lives. He never tried to step into a role that wasn't his. He showed up when invited, left when asked, and listened more than he spoke. One afternoon, while Lily and I were baking, he stood back and let us make a mess of the kitchen. Later, Lily told me she liked that he didn't tell her what to do. That mattered. The hospital oversight committee invited several of us to sit in on policy reviews. It felt surreal, walking through the same institution that had shattered my life, now armed with authority and documentation. I watched administrators squirm as parents asked questions they'd never had to answer before. Why was consent allowed with one parent present? Why weren't improving neurological markers flagged? Why were financial incentives tied to procurement numbers? They had no good answers, only explanations. Change came slowly, but it came. Adrian's world grew smaller. His job never reinstated him. Friends faded. The boat was gone. The narrative he built collapsed under the weight of truth he could no longer outrun. He tried once to send Lily a long letter through the app, explaining himself in words no child should have to read. My attorney intervened. The message was blocked. Some explanations are not for children. One evening, my father came over with a small wooden box he'd been working on. He handed it to Lily and said it was for her and her brother. Inside were carved compartments for photos, drawings, and letters. Lily added a note that night. "I will always remember you." Watching her place it inside without crying told me more than any therapist ever could. The support group expanded. What started as 7 parents became 23. We met weekly, shared strategies, shared grief, shared small victories, sleeping through the night, returning to work, laughing without guilt. Grief didn't disappear, but it stopped isolating us. I began speaking at workshops for nurses and patient advocates. Not accusing, educating. I talked about power dynamics, about consent, about how families interpret authority during crisis. Some staff listened with humility. Others bristled. Both reactions told me the conversation was necessary. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I found Adrian's original funeral speech draft saved on the tablet. He'd written multiple versions. In one, a line was crossed out. "We trusted the system." I stared at it for a long time. Trust, I realize, is not a flaw. Blind trust is. The final custody review happened quietly. The judge extended supervised visitation indefinitely. Adrian didn't contest it. He barely spoke during the hearing. When it ended, he looked at me once, really looked and nodded as if acknowledging something he could never undo. I didn't nod back. That night, Lily and I curled up on the couch, watching a silly movie. She laughed so hard she snorted, then laughed harder because of it. In that moment, Noah felt close, not as absence, but as memory woven into her joy. I thought about how easily this story could have ended differently. How many truths never surface. How many parents live their entire lives believing lies told in sterile rooms by people in white coats. I couldn't change what happened to my son, but I could make sure his story didn't end at a grave. There was still one final piece left, one last chapter one hadn't spoken out loud yet, and it was the hardest one of all. The last truth wasn't about hospitals or courtrooms or the man I once married. It was about me, about the version of myself that existed before everything shattered, and the one who had to learn how to live afterward. I realized this on an ordinary afternoon, months after the hearings ended, while I was folding laundry in the quiet house. The sun slanted through the window, just right, and for a brief moment, the world felt almost peaceful. That was when it hit me how much I had changed. Before Noah died, I trusted easily. I deferred to authority. I believed that good intentions were enough to keep people safe. I believed that love could shield a family from the worst outcomes. Losing my son, and then learning how, burned those illusions away. What replaced them wasn't bitterness. It was awareness. That awareness showed up in small ways. I asked more questions at doctor's appointments. I read forms instead of signing them blindly. I taught Lily that it was okay to say I don't understand and I need more time. Those lessons mattered as much as anything I'd fought for in court. One evening, Lily asked if she could read me one of her letters to Noah. We sat on the edge of her bed, the lamp casting a soft glow over the pages. Her voice was steady as she talked about her soccer team, her best friend at school, the way she still talked to him when she felt scared. When she finished, she looked up at me and said, "I think he knows I'm okay." I hugged her and realized something important. Healing wasn't forgetting. It was learning how to carry love without letting pain crush you. At work, I began mentoring new volunteers at the nonprofit. Many were parents still raw with loss, their eyes searching for answers I couldn't give. I didn't promise them peace or closure. I promised them honesty. I told them the truth, that some wounds never fully close, but they stop bleeding if you care for them properly. The Hospital Oversight Committee released its first annual report. Procurement numbers dropped. Review protocols tightened. Families were given mandatory cooling-off periods before consent discussions. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Seeing Noah's legacy reflected in policy changes made the fight feel worth it. Adrian remained a distant figure in our lives. Communication stayed limited to logistics. Lily grew comfortable with the routine. One day, she asked if she had to keep going to supervised visits forever. I told her that grown-ups were working to make sure everyone stayed safe and that her feelings mattered. She nodded, satisfied for now. Thomas stayed quietly and patiently. He never tried to fix what was broken. He simply respected the cracks. That gentleness taught me something too. That love after loss doesn't arrive loudly. It waits until you're ready to hear it. On the second anniversary of learning the truth, I returned to the cemetery alone again. I didn't bring flowers this time. I brought a small notebook filled with notes from families I'd helped, messages from parents who had paused, questioned, waited. I read a few aloud, then tucked the notebook beneath the stone. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "Your story mattered." As I walked back to my car, I understood that what I had built wasn't about punishment or payback. It was about refusing to let silence be the final chapter. It was about choosing truth even when it cost comfort, relationships, and the life I thought I'd have. I didn't get my son back, But I got something else: clarity, purpose, and the certainty that love, when paired with courage, can outlast even the deepest betrayal. And if you've listened to this entire story, thank you for staying with me through it. If it moved you, do me one last favor. Subscribe to the channel, share this story, and comment where you're watching from. It helps stories like this reach the people who need them most.